Hey, Jack. All right. You got this stuff?
Yeah. All cleaned in oil.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's get it on.
Who are these guys?
It's my theme music. Every good hero should have some.
Podcast, the weekly pseudo-academic pop culture analysis roundtable with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with my co-hosts, Hannah and Wayne. How's it going, guys?
Hey, Mav.
Can we cancel 2020?
I don't think they take returns. I think it's too late. You know, it's kind of a sort of a you break it, you buy it kind of thing.
Well, we were just talking before we started recording. We have a pandemic followed by murder hornets, and today there was an announcement of a Twilight sequel. So, you know, that's it. We're done.
Yep, we are very done. And also, like, if you want to talk about your past coming back to haunt you, I thought I'd left this behind in high school.
Well, I did want to say that, you know, if you've listened to our last episode, I did want to thank you, Wayne, for bringing Man vs. Bear into my life. That was the best thing that has happened. I mean, now I watched several of the things that we mentioned on our Bad Things We Love episode. I also watched Too Hot to Handle, which I didn't like as much as I thought. The robot was not present enough. I wanted more robot. But Man vs. Bear was everything
Matthew.
you promised. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was funny because when I was listening back to that episode, Katya said, well, it only works, you know, if somebody falls in love with the robot. And then somebody did. And it was awesome.
But, and then he became an abstinence detective, which, like, I don't like that show is too much.
Yeah. Yes. But really, Man vs. Bear, if you've not watched Man vs. Bear, go on the Discovery Channel, go on Hulu, find Man vs. Bear. Wayne was right. It is everything that you promised. It is Man versus Bear, and the bear always wins.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump ahead here. We have my roommate Marcel is back as a guest today, and it was actually his boss at the Holocaust Center who recommended that to the two of us. Oh. And likewise, we're both like, oh, right, okay, yeah, whatever. And then we couldn't look away.
Well, my wife's stuff's here, and when we finished recording that episode, I was like, I went into the other room and said, we have to watch this. And then we watched all 9 episodes, just back to back. We're just gonna eat. This is 9 hours of our lives. And it was not a waste. This was something that needed to be done. But anyway,
it needed to be done.
It needed to be done. It just like living in the year 2020, as you said, all the problems, you know, for 9 straight hours last week, everything went away. And it was just me, Steph, the television, a man, and a bear. And it was
because really, isn't the metaphor of 2020 is we're all fighting a giant bear?
Yes, it was great. But anyway, so not the topic to this week, but maybe we'll have to do a Man vs. Bear retrospective show at some point. This week, I want to talk about music and movies because we have a lot of people here. So, you know, I'll say we already said my wife Steph's here. Hey, Steph.
Everybody.
Steph's back.
Hey, Steph.
Wayne's roommate Marcel's here. Hey, Marcel.
Hello, friends. How are you?
Welcome back.
Yeah. And we have Maximilian of Software Music, who, you know, writes our epic theme song. Hey, Max.
Hey, Max.
Howdy.
This topic's here for a couple reasons. One, I wanted Max on the show just because Max I know Max is a musician, but also he and I have a love of several. When we used to be roommates, we would play lots of movie soundtracks just like randomly as like studying background music. Broken Arrow being one of the greatest soundtracks to a movie that Steph's looking at me like, what is Broken Arrow? Like, it doesn't matter. The movies.
Is that Christian Slater?
Christian Slater is in it.
Yes. I know all the Christian Slater movies.
Okay. But
I don't know who Christian Slater is.
You don't know who Christian Slater is.
No.
Really?
No.
She's lying.
Oh, you have to watch Heathers.
I'm not, and I don't know what Heathers is, but
Oh, he's
I guess
so
I have
hot in
time.
that.
Well,
Is this a
anyway.
generational gap?
Yeah, it's a generational gap.
It is.
I thought he's still famous right now, kind of. I mean, Christian Slater's like one of those people.
He was in Mr. Robot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't he win an award or something?
He's won several, but he's one of
for that.
I did not.
He's like our episode where we're talking about people who never quite broke big. Christian Slater has been on the cusp of breaking big for like 40 years now.
Yeah.
probably like 25. I don't know. But Heathers, Broken Arrow, he's had a TV show that nobody watched called The Enemy Within, where he played a guy who was a cop with a split personality, and he was trying to catch this villain who was his other personality, and they were always just running
I
around.
vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I watched it because I was like,
don't think it's very good.
No.
Oh, I know who he is. He had a bit part on The West Wing. Yeah, I'm reading his filmography right now. Okay, so he's like a real person who has real jobs, like a lot of the people we talked about on that show. He just isn't a name I might necessarily know straight away if I.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well, he stars in this movie called Broken Arrow, which is a brilliant soundtrack.
Yeah, there's definitely something generational about this. But yeah.
Yeah, well, she's never seen Heathers, so
Yeah.
which is just weird. How are you even a person?
Maybe I'm not. Maybe that's the secret.
Anyway, this so Max I wanted to invite for this just because of his musical background, but I was going to tell the story that that I first had this idea for an episode once when Stephanie, for no reason of her own volition, just pointed out
There was some reason.
well, I was asleep. I like woke up one morning to Stephanie just saying, "Hey, Grease is the best song on the Grease soundtrack." And
I don't think it happened like that.
It did
There
happen.
was some backstory.
and I remember telling her, it's like, nobody thinks that. And she says, "What song's better?" And I was like, all of them. Every song on the Grease soundtrack is better than that. Now, to be fair, you're a huge Bee Gees fan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Another generational gap, I'm sure.
well, no, but it's just like, I think Grease is Grease is not necessarily the best movie. It's a movie I very much enjoy. But what makes that movie work is just the soundtrack. It's just a musical, and the songs just sort of carry the plot along. And the reason I don't like the song Grease is it doesn't fit.
Well, it wasn't really in the movie. I think it was just the credits, and it helped you kind of like pull out of the 50s and come back to the present day.
The 70s.
The 70s, yes. Or if you're watching it in later, then it helps you at least advance the years a little bit before you come back to it.
Sure. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what makes a soundtrack good. Well, there's two things: a soundtrack, a score, a needle drop, diegetic music, non-diegetic music. These are all terms we're going to use throughout the discussion today. And we sort of wanted to sort of have a free-form discussion about what makes things work.
Okay, I hope you are going to define those terms.
Can you define diegetic for people who didn't finish college?
I finished college and I still don't know.
All right, well, that's probably the hardest one. Diegetic means the world of the film or the world of the book. So in a movie, music is the easiest way to say this. If the other characters in the movie can hear the music, then it's diegetic music. So
go
ahead, Hannah.
Like on Lost, Hurley finds a CD player and he presses play, and then you can hear what he's listening to, but it's like organic to what's happening because he can hear it through his headphones. Whereas non-diegetic music is like basically most
everything
of like
Star
scores, like the Star Wars soundtrack. Like they're not hearing most, if not like
Darth Vader does not hear Darth Vader march whenever he walks on screen.
I like to pretend.
Maybe he does.
Chewie does.
Maybe that's why he's so bad.
Right, and just quick shout out. I know someone at Duke who studies this. Karen Messina. We can link to her academic profile. Like she studies diegetic and non-diegetic music and opera, which I basically like learned a lot of what I know, like basically from her about like what's going on in film. So thanks, Karen.
Yeah, so diegetic versus non-diegetic is, and so that's a good example. I always use the example of the music in Say Anything, just because I said in the blog, when he holds that boombox up, obviously they piped that music in. They didn't use the live recording. They piped it in later in the editing booth. But those characters can hear him playing Peter Gabriel. So it's diegetically in the music, in the movie. and then non-diegetic is everything else. So there's diegetic music, there's non-diegetic music. There's sometimes where it's kind of, some people will play with the form and, who can hear it and who can't. Baby Driver is a good example of that. Like Baby Driver, he's listening to music throughout, but not necessarily all the other characters can hear it, but it is technically diegetic music because, he's got his headphones on. And then we should talk about, there's scores versus soundtracks. Max, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, that's okay. That's not like a college word.
No, I want to make sure we have all of them out there.
So when you're watching Top Gun and they play Danger Zone, that would be the soundtrack. And I don't think there's any other music in that movie that isn't part of the soundtrack. And the score is what John Williams does for Star Wars and stuff. It's actually music written for the movie, timed to the movie, and
yeah, those kind of bleed together a lot too, because you've got and I don't want to say this absolutely. Commonly, soundtracks tend to be a lot of pop songs or rock songs, and scores tend to be a lot of orchestral music, but not necessarily, because they can bleed together. But it's very much about, here's a song that we decided to put in the movie versus this is the atmospheric music that happens for the movie as a score. And my good example there is always Jaws, because I maintain that John Williams should have won Best Actor for Jaws because the music is, he is the shark. That special effect, really crappy robot is not the shark. That song is the shark in Jaws.
Yeah, and I think in an artistic sense, there's not really a difference between soundtrack and score. It's more of like a commercial division of how you sell the different kinds of music that are both serving the same function in the movie.
Mm-hmm. And then we had the other term I used was needle drops. And a needle drop, there's not a technical definition there. When I say a needle drop, what I mostly mean is you've got some sort of song that calls attention to itself when you're when the movie is playing. So this happens a lot in superhero movies today, because you'll have things like the example I used in the blog was Captain Marvel, where it's like, we're going to start the fight now. So then Just a Girl starts playing, because you see, she's a girl and we're doing a girl fight. You see, it's female empowerment because she's just a girl. And I like the song, but it was just so in your face. The movie Suicide Squad is nothing but this. So those happen a lot, but then it can be used well. One of my best examples is the movie Desperado, which has a song called White Train by Tito and Tarantula, which is, there's a moment where Antonio Banderas's mariachi character walks out and he says, "Let's play," and then the music starts at exactly that moment. And then you're timing, the beats of the action are timed to exactly the music in sort of a perfect scoring.
Oh, but can I have a counterpoint real quick?
Sure.
Captain Marvel is not overblown in a bad way, because it perfectly fits the 90s aesthetic of girl power, and also it's a fun sequence to watch. So I think
I love that scene.
Yeah. I thought the music. I also think that Marvel actually has done, in particular, James Gunn in the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtracks, which is not a hot take at all. But the Spider-Man movies, they pick such good songs that if they want to do a 5-minute fight scene to that song, I'll watch that song and that fight scene. It makes the time go by.
Well, I also think with Guardians, there's that weird mix of, when they are in the first movie, when they're getting ready to go on that final mission and the Runaways Cherry Bomb is playing, I don't get the impression that they're all sitting there listening to it at the time. I mean, it's definitely non-diegetic at that moment. However, it's implied that all of these songs are on the tape that he carries with him. So at some point, they've all heard Cherry Bomb, whether it's in that moment or not. So so there's sort of that weird mix with that.
Also with Guardians of the Galaxy and that tape of that soundtrack.
For the four people who own it.
So it blends into the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Cloud Atlas, a movie no one saw, did this too. They made a limited edition. Oh, I did too, but no one else saw it.
I saw it.
I saw it. That was a great movie.
Oh, there you go. Just us nerds.
Yeah.
I think I saw it. I'm not 100%
Josh
sure, but I think I did.
I saw it. You went with me.
Okay.
Yeah, and Josh popped into the room to raise his hand silently, so he's also... Actually, Josh and I skipped a Halloween party we didn't want to go to, and we went to the next town over and we watched it in the movie theater for Halloween. So if you're my friend who's listening to this 10 years later, I'm not sorry.
We've also named all 10 people who've ever seen the movie Cloud Atlas just now. So.
Yeah. But Cloud Atlas has a score that's part of the plot of one of the plots of the movie, and that serves as the score for the film itself. And the makers of the film also released a limited edition vinyl of that score. Mm-hmm. So if you want to pay $500, which if I had $500, maybe I would, you can buy the score packaged as if it's the vinyl from the film. Hmm. So there music, there are some movies and TV shows that have found a way to have real life Easter eggs with the way that the viewers can also interact with the music in their real lives. Mm-hmm. As if you are Peter Quill or one of the many characters in Cloud Atlas.
Okay, so picking it up from there, if we're talking about things the songs that are, as Max said, these soundtrack songs, and you pointed out that, is the thing with Captain Marvel, bad or good? I actually think it's good. In particular, I like the Just a Girl scene at the end a lot because I think it works really well. My problem with the way it worked in Captain Marvel was that by the time we got to that scene, I was on 90s overload in a way that didn't work well enough for me. Not going to see it now. There's a difference though. Hannah was younger at that point than I was. So that's more of a defining musical time for you because
I was a nice
really
kid.
Well, huh?
I was a nice kid. Blockbuster, right. Dunkaroos,
Yeah. And so there's a nostalgia there for you that's not there for me. Whereas with Guardians, for instance, Guardians is exactly the music that I grew up listening to, right? That's it.
Same here.
I am roughly the age that Peter Quill is, right? So that makes maybe there's a targeting thing there, but I don't think because I think the bad example is Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad, 10 minutes into the movie, I just don't care about the music anymore because they the opening montage is 4 songs in 5 minutes. They just clip them together and it just gets dizzying and it didn't work. They're trying too hard.
To be fair, Suicide Squad, let's be blunt, just isn't that great a movie anyway. It has a lot of things working against it. Yeah,
it's a bad movie. It's a better movie than I thought it was going to be. But I thought it was. I thought it was going to be absolute garbage, and it was just bad.
Well, but it also brings up an interesting area there too, because to what extent does music make a film? Does it make it good or bearable or great? I think music, whether it's a score or a soundtrack or both, music well utilized in a movie, obviously it elevates the narrative. So, because I've watched my fair share of dumb movies that have had amazing soundtracks. I don't know how many movies though, and here's the thing. I think we could all name movies that were maybe so movies overall, but had great soundtracks. How many movies though can you name that were great, but the soundtracks really didn't do anything or you weren't thinking about it? I think a bad soundtrack either detracts from the movie or you don't notice it at all. And I get a lot of people don't pay attention to soundtracks in movies. I'm kind of obsessed with soundtracks in movies, whether it's songs or scores. I really can't not notice them.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about that, Marcel. I don't notice them the way you do. It becomes part of the overall experience. And I know if the music wasn't there, the way I perceive the movie would be very different. But I can't say I'm often consciously aware of, particularly orchestral soundtrack while I'm watching the movie. Not in the way you are anyway. I'm aware of it in that if it wasn't there, I would notice. Right. And I know it has an impact on my emotion and the way I perceive things, but I don't consciously separate it out the way I think you do.
Well, you and I just recently watched a movie that this is the first time I watched that movie in almost 20 years. And it's not the movie I thought I'd start out talking about, but I'll mention it. So yeah, he's laughing because he knows exactly what movie I'm talking about. So Van Helsing, which came out in, early 2000s, almost 20 years ago. Yeah, almost 20 years ago. So Van Helsing, I remember when there was the lead up to this movie because, you had Hugh Jackman and he was in the X movie. So he was really super hype and popular. And when I first found out about this movie through friends, it seemed like it was going to be a slam dunk, like, because it was you had Hugh Jackman in all his power. You had, I'm trying to think of the director's name, Stephen Sommers, who was just coming off of the 2 Mummy movies he directed. And I had not expected to like those. And I saw the first one and was surprised how much I liked it. And then the second one was better. And Universal had just given him the keys to work with the Universal monster. So Van Helsing seemed like it was going to be a slam dunk. I saw it opening weekend. Movie was trash. Like it was so bad that the whole audience was in agreement and we all walked out just laughing at the things that you don't want to laugh. It was ridiculous. I will say this. I sat in that theater. The one thing that I walked out of there impressed by was the soundtrack, because there was this classical guitar that was going all through the movie, through all the action scenes and stuff. And it was amazing. I was like, I'm going to look for that sound. So literally I was out the next day. I bought that soundtrack based on that classical guitar. Now, here's where that movie pulled a second sucker punch on me, because I played that when I got home. And I mean, that classical guitar went all through the movie. Like, it was the one thing that kept my attention in that movie. And that piece made up about a minute and a half of the soundtrack. They had just been looping it again and again in the movie. I was so angry, like, to this day. But I'll tell you what.
It's a thing. Trust me on this. It's a thing.
I'm half not. A movie's bad too when you walk out of the theater with an idea for what the movie should have been in your head, like almost a full-blown script. But that said, it also has made me pay closer attention to how other music is utilized in movies. Now, I do pay attention to that, but the idea because that was such a cheat. I realized, like, with the way they utilized this one great piece, but they used it over again, and it wasn't just the leitmotif. Like, they kind of over relied on that one piece. But in the hands of a skillful composer, and there's so many of them, and we'll go into that before we're done, I'm sure. But in the hands of skillful composers, that doesn't happen. And when I've listened to soundtracks after the fact, I am a huge John Williams fan. Now, the world of music scores goes far, far beyond John Williams, both before and after. But, I'm not the first person to think that nobody does it as well as he does, because so many of his scores, like Mav, you already cited one of his key ones, Jaws. Like, his scores bring to mind characters and scenarios, and you could hum just a few notes from some of them. Jaws, you can literally hum 2 notes and people know what that is. Now, that's power, because there's so many powerful film composers who you would you might know their names, and you could say you definitely have seen their movies, but would you recognize a few notes or even a bar or whatever of a score? So there's a lot of criteria as to what works, what doesn't. Like, right now, as much as I love that classical guitar in Van Helsing, you know what? I was going to say I couldn't tell you who composed it, but I think it was actually James Horner. And I'm going to look that up before we're done. But there's a lot of factors that go into this stuff.
So, with Williams, I think, for instance, very few people who are into scores and soundtrack wouldn't consider him sort of the king of that job, right? He's I don't even remember how many Grammys and Oscars he has total, but it's a ridiculous amount, like 17 or something.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Best scores. It's like half the films since he's been, half the year since he's been working, he just wins. And I think that one of the things that's amazing about Williams, for instance, he scored all the Star Wars movies, or all the main ones, and the subtle variation, there is a Empire theme, but the Empire theme from Empire Strikes Back is different than the Empire theme from Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. And it's in very subtle ways that sort of update it. And, he is very good at making the song part of the movie, part of the experience. Wayne, you talked about not actually noticing it, but if you ever get a chance, if you go on YouTube, and if I find it, I'll link it in the show notes. But there are, people have cut together, here's what Star Wars sounds or looks and sounds like without the musical score. Yeah. It's fucking weird.
And that's it. When I say I don't notice it, it's unconscious. I know I notice it,
Yeah, you're noticing
it becomes
you're
part
noticing
of
not being drawn out.
It becomes part of the whole experience for me. It is so married to the imagery and everything that's going on that I don't separate it out in the same way.
And with Jaws, for instance, he has the shark music plays when the shark's around, and there are points underwater where the shark's not there and the music doesn't play, and it's sort of eerie by its absence. Like it is, and the shark's not there. And
Jaws would be a very different movie with the Benny Hill theme.
Yes. The Benny Hill thing is one of the most brilliant music scores ever. Yakety Sax, for people who don't know, is the name of the song.
We now need to mash up a Jaws scene with Yakety Sax just to see how it looks. Max, get on that.
If I can find it, there is somebody's website that just takes random movies and replaces all the scores with Yakety Sax. I might link them in the show notes too, if I can find it.
Do.
I think music in movies, as far as like people's attentions, generally speaking, they work like special. It's a special effect. It's because when special effects are working, you kind of don't notice them.
Yeah.
So I think it works kind of like that. Also, before I forget, I just want to throw in that Van Helsing was by Alan Silvestri, just so credit is due.
That's another one. So Silvestri is a big composer. Zimmer's one. Max, who else are the big names?
Zimmer.
You don't like Zimmer?
Well,
I love Zimmer. I love Zimmer's music.
It's a joke. I can get into it later.
Yeah.
Zimmer is actually, he's really great, but he's not the best. So he's like a really good guy to hate if you're jealous of his success and whatnot.
Because you'd feel bad. You'd feel bad if you're like, oh, I hate John Williams.
I can't hate John Williams.
Oh, you could. You know what? I have gotten in arguments with people about John Williams, and the single biggest thing that people levy against him is that John Williams's music all sounds alike. And I mean, I came ready for all of this today because I've had so many people say this about John Williams, but what I will acknowledge is there's a through line with his music. But when you really study his catalog and you line up, because we think of movies like Superman and like Star Wars films and like the Harry Potter films and like Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Indiana Jones movies with a lot of drama and bombast and action, which play to his strengths. But when you look at his full catalog, where he's done movies like Amistad and Lincoln and Catch Me If You Can, John Williams has amazing range. Like there are soundtracks of his Schindler's List. You pull music from those movies. If you were to line up cuts across the board, you wouldn't. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know. But his work, like his approach, is the same. But I've definitely got into arguments about him. So I think like you could. There's individual taste when it comes to composed music for films, as opposed to like who's best, who's not. And I'll say there are composers. There's people who've done work for movies. I can't call them. I'm not really a Zimmer fan, but I did a little bit of research on this and was looking up specific movies with specific composers. And Zimmer has a specific approach that he uses with certain movies, like Inception or Interstellar, where he takes the theme of the movie and builds off of that. So it's kind of like. So
what are some Zimmer movies to remind us?
Broken Arrow.
Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk most recently.
He did some of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I don't think he did them all. Let's see. Or he might have done them all, but Interstellar.
Dark Knight.
Yeah, he likes to work with Nolan a lot, Christopher Nolan. Or Christopher Nolan likes to work with him, probably. I think Nolan's
some
choice.
Memento too, then.
Did he do
I don't
Memento?
know if it goes that far back. He might have.
Yeah. He did Inception.
If you play the soundtrack to Memento backwards, you get the entire story.
That is hilarious. Well played. He did most recently Dunkirk.
Yeah,
and
he doesn't.
There's a lot of complexities in that I was not aware of. Like, so, he is thinking. It's easy to dismiss certain people. Like I was not a fan of his Man of Steel score, but you know what? I've gone back. I've listened to it again. There are elements of it that I can appreciate. Like I can't say it's won me over per se. Part of that is also because John Williams has left such a deep impression with that character. I don't know if it's really possible to kick that one out to really fully embrace another one. But he's got an approach that he uses that works. It's God, there's just I'm sorry, I have literally a list of different composers in front of me because I was thinking this through, like what, and right now we're just talking about people who make music for film and what goes into that and what makes, what works consistently and what doesn't. Two of the more recent composers whose work I'm a big fan of are John Ottman. And John Ottman works a lot with Bryan Singer. So his movies included the X-Men movies, starting with X-Men 2, X-Men United, then X-Men Apocalypse, X-Men Days of Future Past, but he also did Valkyrie, The Losers. He did the music on Superman Returns, there's The Usual Suspects. And what makes John Ottman unique is he also edits a lot of the movies that he works on, including several of the ones I just mentioned. So there's a composer who has a lot of power, because you figure typically music is scored to a film, but when you're also working as editor, you can do that same process the other way. So his movies are unique. There's also Michael Giacchino, and Giacchino's just you want to talk about an impressive catalog. Look at his range of stuff. It's kind of crazy.
It's so good.
He's worked on film and TV. He worked on Lost. He worked on Alias. And I mean, I don't even hardly know where to begin with that dude. Like he's just the Incredibles movies, the more recent Spider-Man movies. That guy, and he's so smart. A range of influences there. You listen to his Incredibles soundtracks. There's kind of a 60s jazz vibe thing going on there compared to the things from Marvel, like the Spider-Man movies, where it's much more in keeping with the robust nature of current superhero films. So, any one of them you could pick apart, like what makes them work and what doesn't. But there's so many choices that go into what they do, and finding the right composer that works. That said, I still say John Williams is the best because you just remember his stuff.
Oh, I was going to say that I've noticed that like every person we've listed so far has been a man, like in terms of like composers. And I that's partially for a reason in that very few women have like gotten the same kind of recognition as John Williams, though Hildur Guðnadóttir just won for the Joker soundtrack.
Yes.
And I can link to a source for those of you who are like interested more, but she's one of the very, very few women who's ever won for Best Original Score. And
she's the first.
Is she not the only one? I thought she was the only.
No, sorry. Oh, not. Let me correct that. Back up. She's one of the few women who's been nominated, and she's nominated.
Only winner.
Yeah, and like that's not surprising. I think that like the only thing in pop culture, and again, like there's so much pop culture. But the one thing I've seen who like that's ever like bothered to even talk about what goes into being a female composer and highlighting some of the historical female composers was Mozart in the Jungle, which Amazon very rudely canceled in a very unhappy place. And it was a delightfully quirky TV show about union rights and music and starred Gael Garcia Bernal. So like, why would you do that? But anyway, like it's still like a lot of parts of like the film and TV industry still like dominated heavily by men.
Mm-hmm. I do want to get a little into what we've been talking just about sort of our favorites of who people are, but I'm sort of curious as to what makes a soundtrack work or a score work and what makes it not work. So Steph, for instance, like you like the Grease song, you talked about it a little bit. You like it because you said, obviously you like the band, but also what makes it work for that movie for you?
Okay, well, to be completely honest about this, I wouldn't really say, I just like the Bee Gees. And if I really had to be honest and say which of the songs on the Grease soundtrack I like the most, it probably would not be that one. I don't know which one it would be. I'm not a fan of 50s music. I do like disco, but yeah, I don't like it. When I said I did like it, it was mostly because I'm a BG fan, and yeah, it didn't really have anything to do with how it integrated with the movie.
What can you think of, and not one of the ones we said already, so not Jaws, but like, can you think of a song where you're like, oh, that song does make the movie? Okay,
like the one thing that keeps coming to mind is that theme from Battlestar Galactica. That I think it's All Along the Watchtower, like a kind of tone. That's like haunting to me. And of course, Jaws, and of course the classic Halloween. I
think those are perfect examples, because I think in things like, we talked about diegetic versus non-diegetic. In Halloween, in Jaws, these are absolutely non-diegetic music, right? Like the shark. The music is the theme to the shark. That is the character of the shark. That is the character of Michael Myers. Galactica, there's sort of it's sort of both, right? Like they do All Along the Watchtower subtly, and they build it over a course of
I think that's why it's so brilliant. Haunting. Yeah. And then until they finally get to the point where, people are hearing it in their head. What is it? And like, I don't know when I actually picked up on what it was, but it wasn't originally. It wasn't when they first. It wasn't even when they first started talking about it. On a rewatch, I've gone back and realized, oh my God, they were using this for a year before anybody mentioned it. It's brilliant.
A good song to do that with, because it's only got like the 2 chords.
Yeah. And it's just it's like subtle. It'll just be slowly, just in a random scene. It will just be, and you'll just hear it like quietly under some other music or while somebody's walking by, and you can just pick it up for. Max, you said it's easily like a year before they start pointing out they can hear it in their heads and stuff. It's weird. And then when they do that, like they're like on the episode where it all comes together, it's just different people playing it. And it's not the original recording or any of the 5 previous times it's charted. It never seems. It never seems to like really knock you over the head, or at least it didn't for me.
That's an interesting song, because I don't know if I've ever actually heard the original, but I can't imagine the original being better than any of the covers, because it's from Bob Dylan.
Dylan is. I think Dylan wrote it, but
yes,
Hendrix,
he definitely wrote it.
He wrote it and recorded it first. Yes.
Okay, because there's been so many covers of it.
And they're all so good.
And Dylan's is probably the least known.
And his is really good. I'm not the biggest Dylan fan in the world. It took me a long time to appreciate him as a songwriter.
Love Dylan so much.
I have come to, but it took a long time to get there. Yeah.
Dylan was on our show last week live.
Wow, how'd you get him? Okay. Couldn't understand what he said.
We just talked about this on the last episode we recorded. But it's partially because it's a really good song, and his version of it is solid. But there have been much better covers of it.
Hendrix is,
I think that's the first version I've ever heard. Actually,
and the Prince one's nice. I mean, it's and the Galactic one's nice. It always works.
Yeah.
I am curious because, like, I think that Marcel was saying, you could have a song like that just sort of really fits in. In Galactica, it really fits in. In Jaws, it really fits in. And I think Baby Driver, one of my favorite movies, and I think that worked because more so than even any of the visuals, that is a part of the experience of watching that movie, is like really just sort of watching it and paying attention to exactly how the musical people walk in time to that film, and it's amazing. And then I think about something like Jaws, where Jaws is, the music for Jaws is almost, not only is it a brilliantly written song, but it's almost like listening to Peter and the Wolf, where, the instrument is part of it. And I mentioned there are things like, it's a musical, not a movie yet, but I'm sure it will be. But like Hamilton, you don't need the visuals. You can just listen to the album, and that is literally the entire story. What happens when because I'm thinking about Wayne's thing where he talked about how not noticing. And I said, well, but you do suddenly notice. I think there's a thing where where if a song is changed, there's this thing called the Walk of Life Project, which I will link to in the show notes, which, yeah, it literally takes the ends of about 50 different movies, and whatever the last scene is, they play the last scene by replacing whatever the music should have been with Walk of Life by the Dire Straits. It's
kind of awesome.
It's fascinating because sometimes it works. I mean, it always works. It fits in, but it can entirely change the mood of the scene.
Well, and that comes into play sometimes when this stuff being released, the rights to the music and how that's played out. One of the examples of that I can think of is TV show Northern Exposure. Just really used music incredibly well, and the DVD release of that series were horribly delayed because they couldn't obtain all the rights again. And they never did obtain all the rights. When they finally released it on DVD, they replaced some of the songs. So when you watch those episodes on the DVD, it's not the same experience as when you watch them live.
That's
when
so
they were
wrong.
Yeah, and it's been long enough now since the beginning. When I first got the DVDs, I was aware of some of the changes. It's now been long enough since I've seen the originals that I don't know what they are. But there were places where they overtly changed the musical cues and the songs that were being used, and it changed the mood of the scene.
Yeah, I remember back when House was on, I used to watch House all the time, and occasionally I'd miss an episode, so I'd have to go watch it on iTunes or something, where they did not have the rights to use Teardrop as the opening theme, and it just ruins the entire experience.
And that licensing songs for TV, I'm just bringing this up. Marcel and I have been binge watching the TV series My Name is Earl. And they must have spent 98% of their budget on the soundtrack, because every episode, 22-minute episodes, is about 20 minutes of licensed songs, and they're used incredibly well. They're kind of brilliantly placed. But dear God, the money they had to spend to obtain the rights to this stuff, it's just kind of stunning to me.
Yeah, they went deep.
Yeah, they went
do
really
it for
deep.
main characters, incidental characters. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So this, I guess, will loop in several of the things that we're talking about here, because, so we were talking before about individuals, like the first part of our conversation had to do with individuals, particularly film composers, and, who are favorites and who are not favorites. And as I've come to generally understand it, there's film like composers and scores, music that is made specifically for a movie. And then there are soundtracks where music is curated, pre-existing music is curated for a film. Now, it's all serves more or less the same purpose, but there is a slight difference, obviously, if you're making something specific for a film versus curating it. But that said, what makes the soundtrack work, whether it's a score, whether it's songs, whatever. And I've come across a couple things recently. There's a YouTube channel called Cinefix, and they have a lot of really great essays on filmmaking, and they talk a good bit about both scores and soundtrack. And one of the things that this calls into play is, and I think it's why we gravitate to certain composers more than others, but this can work as well with if you're curating a soundtrack, is there's mood. Like, I think, Wayne, you touched upon, like, there's the mood. Some composers are really good at establishing mood. And when you think about that, there's movies like The Omen, where, even me just saying that just now, there's certain musical cues that brought to mind because it's such a part of it. Taxi Driver is another one, or the Terminator movies. There's a mood that is suggested by what is done there. But then there's also, now in Cinefix's essay, they talk about a difference between mood and tone. I think that's very, very similar. But, if there are movies like, you had mentioned before, Pirates of the Caribbean, those movies, and I think it comes down to their leitmotif. There's that whole swashbuckling element that is very much conveyed in those movies. There's more high concept composition with films where there's ideas at work, which is where that's actually where I think Hans Zimmer, where he comes in. I think he's thinking more intellectually about his approach to music. But ultimately, I think the thing that, and there are other with things that break down. But I think ultimately the music in a film, it really has to evoke an emotional response in a listener, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. Like music in a movie, to me, it is honing in on the audience's emotions. And it is manipulating you, and whether you want to be or not. I mean, if in my mind, if you're watching a movie, you have given a tacit permission for this narrative to manipulate you emotionally. So
to a degree.
Yeah. Well, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, people, several people today have mentioned like themes, and Marcel, especially you, that you didn't even realize that this theme had been repeating throughout the entire movie, and like the Jaws theme. And it seems like the most powerful themes are the ones that are repeated throughout the movie, and you come to recognize, and maybe you come to like associate that with different aspects of the movie, and maybe that impacts your interpretations later on.
Or across 6 movies like Darth Vader.
Or that, yeah.
Well,
I think so. Yeah. Or not across 6 movies like the Marvel movies, which there's actually a bit of YouTube literature on why Marvel music is terrible because they don't bother to repeat it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I'm right.
Yes, with the exception of, and I think it's a lot of it how well the directors work with the composer.
Yeah, that's a question I have. Like, how does that work? Like, do the composers see the fully made movie and then think about their, like, how does the coordination work? Huh? If you're lucky, it depends on. It depends on the director. Yeah,
it depends on the relationship that the composers have with the filmmaker. Because, you know, obviously John Williams and Steven Spielberg Williams tells a really funny story when he's about how their marriage has worked out, where there's a movie, I think it was Schindler's List, when Spielberg approached him to work on that, and he told him about what the narrative was, and he came to his house to do this, and after a moment, Williams had to step outside, and he kind of collect himself and came back and goes, look, I don't think that I'm adequate to this task. I don't think I'm the composer you need for this movie. I don't think I'm talented enough. And Spielberg goes, you're right, but everybody else is dead. So, but they have they have a marriage, but, then you have people like Tarantino, who I guarantee you, Tarantino as a screenwriter and director, he has songs in mind when he's writing his screenplays, and he's able to see that through.
Yeah, he said he does, but then it depends on. So with the Tarantino movies, Kill Bill is very definitively scored differently than all of his other films. Kill Bill, the two Kill Bill movies together, which are scored by the RZA, and it works in a different way than Pulp Fiction is entirely needle drops. Like I said about the Captain Marvel movie. Pulp Fiction is literally a lot of, and by the way, I love the theme. I love the soundtrack of Pulp Fiction, but it's a lot of, how can I make this song work right here? I want to play Reservoir Dogs too. I want to play Little Green Bag. What do I have to do in order to make this work? And you can tell he's doing that.
Well, I want to touch on that. One of the comments we got from Terry Lee, who's been on our show, talking about seeing A Knight's Tale, which was using contemporary music in that setting, and how it completely took him out of it. And that is a case. Like, there were needle drops used in that movie, contemporary music, but in that medieval setting, he just didn't think it worked.
Yeah, Knight's Tale is very definitely, they're like, okay, we need to use We Will Rock You in this movie. What do we need to do to get you to a situation where we can play We Will Rock You? And that's, and it feels like it. On the other hand, like Marcel said, with Williams and Spielberg, everything just feels massively organic because they work together. Max, you've done the exercise as a musician of trying to score a film by yourself, but now obviously you're not. You were doing it as an exercise. You weren't hired by the director, so you're doing it after the fact. But how do you go about that process?
I go through the whole movie and basically just set up the timing, seem like where the music needs to change, where the tempo needs to change and the feel of it and all that. And then I just, I'll like focus in on one section, and I'll refer back to the other things I've already written for it to see, what things it might make sense to reuse here or to reuse and alter here and whatnot. And so it's just basically dividing it into a bunch of very small compositions that can be united throughout the thing.
And if you've ever seen footage of how Williams scores a big blockbuster, he sits there conducting with the movie playing behind him. He has the movie playing over the orchestra, and he'll sit there and he watches the movie. And okay, I need more strings over here, so I'll bring the strings up. And nope, horn section. Like he's actually watching the film as they go in order to record it. It's actually a breathtaking to watch him actually work. So,
and that's not how
that's ahead of time.
Yeah,
he's written the music ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, but he's editing the music then at that point, you're saying?
He's recording it while watching it. He's doing the recording and making editorial changes in his head because he's
a lot of that has to do with syncing it up to the film, but you have, nowadays it's nice because we live in a day and age where more music from films is released. When I first got the introductory soundtrack for me was the one for Superman the movie. Go figure. That was all the things, it was Superman and it was this grand score and it was this double album vinyl set. And I listened to that thing incessantly. In the movie, Lex Luthor says, you can learn the secrets of the universe from a chewing gum wrapper if you're trying. And I feel like that one soundtrack kind of opened up the world of soundtrack. There's that soundtrack I credit with the reason why I'm kind of obsessed with how all these things work. And, and there's I think it needs to be noted, there's no one way to work on these things because, TV composers, it's one person and they are literally scoring every episode when it's like an actual score and soundtrack. First person who I was aware of doing that was Jan Hammer, who worked on Miami Vice. I had never, it had never occurred to me that one person could produce all the music you hear, but that's common now. That does happen a good bit. So there is no one way to do it though, because there are composers who will compose themes and a lot of it before they even see anything, like based on scripts and notes and things like that, which I think would be incredibly hard. But then there's a lot of editing options that come in after the fact, which is why. Yeah. And I mentioned Mike, John Ottman earlier. And I got to tell you, the ENTJ part of me really loves the idea of being a film's composer and its editor, because you would be able, if you have the latitude given to you by the filmmaker. And my understanding is that there's a lot of trust in there. I don't know if Singer and Ottman work together anymore. Obviously Singer's in a very different place creatively now, but he is, you have a lot of control if you're able to control both of those elements, both how the movie is edited and how the music syncs to what's happening on screen. I just think that's ideal. Like I certainly would never expect a film composer to take that on. Because that's a whole other discipline. Like film editing is a discipline in and of itself. So just the idea that there's even one person working out there professionally doing both of those things, just kind of boggles my mind. That's the guy I would want to watch work if I could pick. Steph, before I forget to, because I keep thinking about you with this Grease thing. So first of all, I love disco. I love that song. I think Grease, though, falls into a specific category because that's a movie based on a musical, on a stage musical. And anytime you adapt a stage musical to film, there's basically a built-in soundtrack there. And more often than not, what happens is you end up with, songs will get cut for different reasons, just like scenes will get cut and movies because movies and stage musicals are not the same thing. And that's why it can be tricky, of course, making a movie that's faithful to a stage musical. But a practice that is very common is the addition of songs to movie musicals that are based on stage musicals. And that's because for awards purposes, you cannot nominate songs for a best original song from a soundtrack if that soundtrack is derived from pre-existing music. So usually you'll get an original song or two. So because that song can then be nominated. And Grease is one of those songs. Exactly. That's right.
Well, Cabaret is one that the soundtrack of the movie, the movie left out a lot of significant songs from the stage play, and Liza Minnelli gets to sing her ass off on two or three things that aren't in the stage play at all. So And for that reason,
we can go back to our previous episodes for our feelings on award shows. But, I don't know. I'm kind of curious. Before we run out of time, I am kind of curious. Other than stuff we've mentioned, what are the soundtracks that really work or don't work for people? Like, because we touched on it a little bit as to when it can really bring you out. And I've been trying to think of can I think of one where it's just completely ruined? I can think of movies where I've said before, I love the soundtrack to Sucker Punch. I love the soundtrack to Sucker Punch more than I love the movie. The movie works for me at all because it is just a music. If I try to think about the plot to that film, it's awful. If I try to think about anything about it, but it's just visuals to go along when I'm listening to that album.
An hour and a half music video.
Yeah, sure. Very pretty. I think that things that work well, we talked about Jaws, we talked about Star Wars, but I'm wondering for everybody, what are some things, TV or movies, where you feel like the soundtrack does make it? I've
been binging Peaky Blinders during the pandemic. And it's set in the 1920s, and the soundtrack is all more contemporary music. Now, maybe I love it because it's about 90% Nick Cave and PJ Harvey, who I love anyway. But the songs I've chosen, aside from just those two artists, are moody. They really convey a sense of that world, even though they are completely anachronistic and inappropriate. But, they're not sitting there listening to it on the radio. I saw last week, there was one scene where they bring in a Victrola and put on a record and two characters dance. And the record they put on is purely from 1925. It's the music that the characters are listening to diegetically is period appropriate. But I actually found the scene kind of jarring because the music was such a change from the music my brain has associated with this setting now. Although it would have been more jarring if they'd have put on a contemporary record, that would have been completely out of place. But I think that's a case where the music, even though it is the song choices, aside from the orchestral soundtrack of it, the song choices they make really kind of sum up the mood of that world, and I think really add a lot to the experience of the show.
Anna, do you have one?
It's strange, but I really like 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yes.
I've never been able to get the music out of my head. In fact, I went and I bought the soundtrack, and I was mad because they left some songs off, and I could just hear them all in my head. And that's how I discovered Larissa Cleo. And I really feel like the Larissa Cleo in particular, and then a couple of the other songs really fit not just the universe of the film, but also Cats, the main characters. For those of you not seen the film, which you should, and you should do it instead of reading Taming of the Shrew, but that's fine. It really fits Cat's attitude and what she's interested in and how she sees the world. And also, I have to say it because there's nothing else I can say that's positive. I do think the Twilight movies had a very good soundtrack. I think that a lot of people, it might be an age thing. I think a lot of people might have just, it fit the mood such that it is of those books. Mm-hmm. And the music was decent. So anyway, two very weird films with very strange musical combinations if you put them together. But there we are.
Max, what about you?
Well, there are a lot of things I would like to talk about. We probably don't have time. I'd really like to talk about Trent Reznor and John Barry. But I think it would be criminally negligent to release this podcast without discussing Ennio Morricone.
Good call.
Yeah.
And if you think about the Sergio Leone movie, say The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and you take the music away, it's basically just a couple sweaty guys staring at each other for about half the movie.
Good call.
And that
seems like an underestimate of half. There's a lot of standing and staring in that movie.
The twist in that movie is that there are three sweaty guys staring at each other. And I think the way the music went in that one is that the music was kind of composed first. Sergio Leone calls up Ennio Morricone and says, all right, I kind of need to make some money. Could you write me an hour or two of the greatest music that has ever been composed? And then I'll stick some pictures of cowboys over it and put it out there.
You're really selling this movie.
They're good and bad and the ugly.
It's an incredible movie because of the music.
Yeah, but it's not. It's standing and staring at each other. He's not wrong. It's brilliant. One of the most important films of all time.
Yep.
Define a genre.
Yep.
Nothing happens. Right.
Redefined a genre.
Well, I'm considering spaghetti western its own genre. Yeah. Yeah. That's. What were you going to say about Reznor? Just because I do want to actually. I
was going to go back to the process of composing it. So like my understanding is David Fincher just like kind of tells Trent what kind of mood he wants and says for each scene, it says, okay, go off and write some music for this. And Trent got kind of annoyed at that because he ended up like writing 4 hours of music for The Girl with the Dragon, the Tattoo, which I appreciate because I'm glad to have 4 hours of Trent music, but it's like not the most efficient process.
Yeah.
Right. Because the movie's not 4 hours long and there are points when no music's played. So yes. So Stephanie.
Soundtrack rather than score.
Either one.
You know what? I have to confess that I'm not like big on soundtrack.
Well, it doesn't have to be, which is that's sort of the point that Wayne made. Like, can you think of one where you're like, this album, this song? Because I'm trying to think of even like your favorite movies. Like, I know the movies that you like.
I was thinking Memento,
but
that's a question that I have. Like, oftentimes, like the sound. This is what I don't understand. You can like cut this out if necessary.
This is what I want.
But so, like, oftentimes they'll have songs on the soundtrack that weren't in the movie, and like that doesn't seem right to me. Like, what?
That's called trying to sell an album.
Okay.
I hate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
There are many soundtracks where
they succeed for people like me. Who, they add some songs that a lot of people like, and so But yeah, that is kind of cheating.
Mm-hmm. And the score CD usually doesn't do that. The soundtrack CD often does, and and now that people don't sell CDs anymore, like you just buy individual songs or you just get Spotify. I don't know if that's as common as it was, but it used to be really common. Music inspired by the film Dirty Dancing. What the fuck is that?
Okay.
Dirty Dancing
before this happened, I was at Barnes and Noble, and we found music inspired by Game of Thrones, which.
Yeah.
What was it? Imagine Dragons.
It was on vinyl, first of all, and I think like I can't. Yeah, the Lumineers was on it, and like some other pretty strange choices. I don't see how any of them really were inspired by Game of Thrones, but that's fine. Though I do have to say, I thought we were just doing soundtracks, not scores. Mm-hmm. My favorite score fact is that the composer of Game of Thrones did not like Jaime and Brienne's ending either, and so over the white book scene, he put like the wedding theme, and he was like, they should have had a happy ending. This is how I'm subverting this, and it's my favorite fun music fact than ever. And also, he's right, like because it was a terrible ending, and. Well, you've already heard this. You go back and listen.
Go back to the Game of Thrones.
Yeah, they should have ended up together.
I will never be over it. It's been a year.
Well, one of the ones that I wanted, my favorite. See, I don't know. My favorite soundtrack is probably whatever movie I happen to be watching right now at that time. But ones that I wanted to point out just because they sort of merge all the sound and track and score things together.
I know what you're going to say.
What? What do you think I'm going to say?
Purple Rain.
Yeah, well, all three of the Prince movies.
Okay.
The three Prince movies.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, two of which are good. All three of which I love. So Purple Rain, lots of people acknowledge this as a great movie.
Yes, I would agree.
Under the Cherry Moon, criminally underrated movie, didn't do as well. Brilliant movie, brilliant soundtrack. Graffiti Bridge, brilliant soundtrack. Full stop. I adore the movie Graffiti Bridge. Not good. Very confusing, very weird. Prince should not be allowed to write a movie by himself. Stuff just kind of happens, and maybe there's magic going on. But I love the soundtrack from it, and I think that that very much Graffiti Bridge of the three of them was very much. I've got some songs that I've written, and my friends have some songs, and we got to make sure every single one of them is in this movie. And go, and it just, I love the album, but it really is just watching the album and just watching, 15 music videos strung together. Purple Rain and Cherry Moon, though, are very, very well composed and well integrated, especially Cherry Moon. Purple Rain is a musical, like they're playing a band. Cherry Moon, they're not. So it's just sort of, let's try and get the mood. We'll make songs for the mood of the scene. And, Prince was a brilliant musician.
He was a brilliant musician. I don't know if he was, I don't think he was a great actor, but he was
a horrible actor. Graffiti Bridge is a movie where he plays himself poorly. Absolutely poorly. Again, I'm a massive Prince fan, but he's playing himself and failing.
They say that's the hardest person to play. That's what I've heard.
Well, he plays himself in the other two movies.
Prince is the hardest person to play, is what I'm saying.
That's true. Well, you know what? I mean, I would actually... Mav, I'm glad you said those three movies because I actually had those three listed together, Purple Rain, Under the Cherry Moon, and Graffiti Bridge, because I am like you. I love those movies. I don't know if I could call any of them great movies. I think Purple Rain.
That's good. I didn't say great.
I'll put it this way. Purple Rain, I think I would say that one's great, if only because it's what they do with it is great. Like we get to see Prince in his prime as a performer, all the other supporting acts. And it just and it works. Terribly acted. Under the Cherry Moon, it's kind of laughably bad. It's a beautiful looking movie. Though I think Under the Cherry Moon is a beautiful looking movie. But Purple Rain, Under the Cherry Moon, and Graffiti Bridge are Prince's equivalent of the earlier Elvis movies, particularly Jailhouse Rock and King Creole, where you're distilling the essence of the star or stars in Prince's movies case.
It is very much a vehicle, yes.
Yeah, but that music is so powerful. The music makes the narratives more cohesive. And I mentioned the Elvis movies because Elvis himself, he knew his earlier movies were better, the later ones were kind of crap, but his movies always made money. And so his movies allowed other movies, serious, air quotes, serious movies to be made. But you look at his early, like Jailhouse Rock and King Creole, those are good movies. And the music does what the music should. And you have examples of both diegetic and anti-diegetic movie. And by the way, thank you for the explanations, because I thought that diegetic movies were movies that required you to take insulin, and anti-diegetic movies that made you have to eat a cookie. But
Wayne resolved us nothing on this one. Because that's a perfect inning.
So we've resolved nothing. I was going to bring up Bohemian Rhapsody and the Elton John movie.
Yes, I was too.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well,
we usually have a recap after we resolve nothing. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, those are both cases of I'm fans of both those artists, and just as movies. And you mentioned this in the blog, I think. The difference in the way they used the music in both of those movies, like with Queen, it was very much, we see them performing, we see them recording. There were things that were chronologically wrong. I have a friend who was really taken out of the movie and pissed off because in the montage of them touring America in 1975, the song that was playing wasn't recorded until like 3 years later. So it was completely, the wrong song to be playing. The thing is, in 1975, no one in America had heard Queen songs, and the Queen song, like if they had put Ogre Battle over that scene, which is a song they would have been playing on that tour, nobody would have fucking got it. So they picked a song that more people in the audience knew and associated with Queen than anything they would have been performing in 1975. And I was absolutely fine by that. My friend was just like, "Oh, that's
better than Knight's Tale."
What's that?
It's closer than Knight's Tale.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Whereas with Elton John, what was the name of the movie? Rocket Man. Yeah, they use the music more as here's a symbolic musical journey of his life, rather than any attempt to hear the songs in the order he wrote them at the time he wrote them and whatever. It was very much we're using Elton John songs as a soundtrack to illustrate his life in any order we want to. And I thought that worked as well. So,
which is kind of what the Prince movies do. I mean, particularly Purple Rain, especially.
Yeah.
I mean, we resolve nothing. And I do think I find the music that gets played in movies and in TV shows, I find it just so fascinating because I think it's overlooked. And I think what Wayne and Steph both said pretty early on, and Steph right towards the end, you repeated it. There's a lot of not being aware of it, but I think that's sort of what makes it great. Like one of the things that if you go back to like our award show episode, Hannah and I talked about things like how they choose best makeup for Oscar winners. And a lot of times what people do is they vote for the most makeup, which is not really what it means. It's like, oh, I mean, do you know what won best makeup for the Oscars like 3 years ago? Fucking Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad is an Oscar award winning movie because people looked at it and they're like, well, there's sure a lot of makeup on that green guy. So, so it won. And like really what you want is you want it to invisibly disappear into the film, like special effects, like music. Like the reason the shark works in Jaws, I mean, because obviously special effects for the shark, famously the shark broke. But even if it were working, it looked pretty crappy. It was the best they could do at the time, but it wasn't great looking then. And it's certainly horrible looking now, but it works because I never do think about the music. Much like I don't think about, oh, that's Judi Dench. I think about the character she's supposed to be playing. And I think when I'm listening to Jaws, I think about, oh my God, that music's playing. The shark's coming. I don't think about,
the music, the music somehow turned that from a, not great looking mechanical shark into the archetype of all sharks that will someday eat us, Yes. The music was transformative.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes this sort of an interesting conversation. Is just like there's so much of, there are subtle things. One of the ones that I mentioned that we didn't really talk about on the episode, but I mentioned in the blog, the movie The Social Network is a brilliant score. You almost won't notice anything. I actually, if you go back to the blog, I linked to a scene where they're just having an argument, and mostly there isn't a lot of music in it. It's just, I believe that's a Reznor score.
Yeah.
And I believe he basically plays music just at exactly the right times when it needs tension in the argument. And when more tension will be created by just leaving it silent, he leaves it silent. And it's a 5-minute scene. And if you just pay attention to it and just listen to the very, very limited drops of music, that it's all non-diegetic. They can't hear it. They're having an argument, but it just drops in and drops out exactly when it needs it to. And, Reznor is great at that, And I also linked to the RZA for Kill Bill, where he does a very similar thing during that fight. Like there's points where you're just hearing, punches and smashes, and then all of a sudden music will play for 30 seconds and then it'll stop, and it's just, it really is about, building the character of the scene, and you shouldn't be aware of it most of the time, unless you're a weirdo that hunts for it. Yeah.
Could I make one? This will be the last thing I'll mention, I promise. So, yes, I agree. You actually usually with music you shouldn't, but I just wanted to mention an instance where I was acutely aware of the music in a movie, like when I was in the theater, and it really moved me. When the first time I saw Black Panther, I had the pleasure of seeing that amongst a really, really diverse audience. Young people, old people, all background. It was wonderful. And I'm sitting there in the middle of that, and Ludwig Göransson scored this movie, and he has a very close relationship with Ryan Coogler. He's scored several of his movies, like Fruitvale Station and the Creed movies. So, and it should be pointed out, Ludwig Göransson is Swedish. This is a white guy. and I only say that because obviously they built a world in every respect for Black Panther they wanted to be authentic. So, he did a lot of research, not just research, like he went to Africa and he studied music and he recruited musicians from there. And there's a moment where you first enter Wakanda in the movie, and, you kind of break the veil of this giant hologram thing that they have over the city. And the first time you see Wakanda, and there's a vocalist you hear over the music. The vocalist is Baba Mal, who is a very, very, very well-respected vocalist in Africa. And that moment, I mean, I can't even sum it up. It was just like a culmination of all the things. It was the people I was seeing the movie with, what I was seeing, the specific narrative that just took blackness in for everything that it was, and just made it itself. That moment in that movie, when I heard those vocals start, like, it made me want to cry. I might have actually started crying because I was very aware of how the music was driving what I was feeling in that moment, and I was okay with it. So, music, just like any other relationship, it works when you don't notice it's working. But boy, when you do notice it's working, it's powerful. So I'm really glad that we got a chance to explore some of it. I mean, this really just scratched the surface of a conversation this. There's all these subsets. And I would love to get back at some point to talk about what you brought up, is like women in movie and TV soundtracks, because that's a podcast in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Because they aren't recognized that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, women in music in general.
Yeah. Well, we linked to we linked in the show notes to a couple of articles that Hannah found that will talk about who some of the lesser known and probably should be known women composers and scores are.
There was a woman whose name I can't pronounce who did a really cool score for Chernobyl.
Oh.
You should check that out.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, really, like, if you don't want to do any sort of reading or research whatsoever, just go watch Mozart in the Jungle, which, like, it's short and features a lot of contemporary, especially like female composers. So it's cool.
Is that on Netflix?
It's an Amazon Prime.
Oh, okay.
We got that too.
Yes, I guess don't cross picket lines if there's another boycott. But also, it really was like a very like nice, fun, quirky show. Yeah.
So we've resolved nothing.
Yeah, so we've resolved that. I do want to thank all of our guests. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of guests, so go through and thank them all. Marcel, thank you for joining us again. Where can people find out more stuff about you?
Everywhere. MarcelWalker.com. I got social media, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff.
You'll be linked in the show notes. Maximilian.
I have a Twitter now.
Whoa.
So everyone should go follow me there.
How'd that happen?
Yeah, I got bored. I've also been doing a lot of stuff on YouTube since we're in the era of live streaming things now. Mm-hmm. And I have a new album out.
Mm-hmm. Which should be linked in the show notes as well. But all that, cool. the album and your YouTube channel, this is a little different than a score because your YouTube channel is frequently, sometimes it's your artwork to music, which is kind of score-ish, but then you just have sometimes where you play the instrument, which, Wayne has pointed out, is just fascinating to watch sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Stephanie.
Oh yeah, I have news. I have just set up a MySpace page for myself.
A MySpace page?
I'm just kidding.
That was good deadpan. I actually believed you there for a minute.
Yeah, I was planning. Yeah, I was planning that out. My isptutor.org is like for kids, middle school kids who like science. So send your kids there or go there yourself.
Absolutely. Palindrome Hannah.
I'm on Twitter at Hannah Lee Rogers.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah, like I haven't been tweeting anything. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's true. Wayne.
Yeah, I got nothing to do this week.
All right.
Same places.
You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Maverick or on my blog at www.chrismaverick.com. You can follow the show on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all the places, always at Vox Popcast. You can follow the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where we talk about whatever we're going to be talking about next week. And I don't actually know what that is this time, but I'm sure it will be interesting. If you enjoy the show, and we certainly hope you do, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from. And do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review, especially on iTunes. That helps other people find the show. It makes us famous. It uses the algorithm and it gives us something to do and makes us happy. So
it would make Mav very happy. I can attest to that.
Yeah, it would make me very happy. It definitely. I told you we almost got divorced over the whole Grease thing. So you need to keep our life working better.
Yeah, to divert his attention from that.
I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for epic theme song, playing ever so more epically and playing us out. It's kind of weird when you're here to do that.
That's Max.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank our other guests for joining us. I'd like to thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.